Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how I put the blanket binding on these double-sided fleece blankets. If you are using the unicorn fluff or squish, or the different fabric companies have different names for it, you don't have to put a backing on these if you're going to use them as blankets. Some people like to have 2 layers to make it thicker. I find that here in Georgia, 1 layer is plenty for the kids to snuggle up under on the couch. If you want to, you don't have to bind these at all. You can just turn and hem it. You could even leave it raw and it shouldn't fray up or shed too much. But I really like to put these satin bindings on. They are a little fiddly because it's slippery with an already somewhat difficult to work with base here. So I'm going to show you how I put my binding on. I do not pretend to be any expert when it comes to putting on blanket bindings or quilt bindings. This is just a little technique that I've come up with that seems to work pretty well to get a nice edge on the blanket, and it comes together pretty quickly. So let's get going. Materials that you will need today are your single fold blanket binding tape. I use the Wrights brand. For a large blanket, you will need 2 if you've got a 2-yard blanket topper. If you have got the toddler size, which is a fat half, then you will only need 1 packet. So I am doing a big blanket today, so I have 2 of those. You need clips. You will need a couple of pins. I don't often sew with pins, but to get the corners as neat as possible, pins are useful to have. You will need a rotary cutter to trim the edges of your blanket if it still has some of the selvage on it. You will need a pair of scissors. You will need a lighter to melt the ends of your binding so that it doesn't fray. A seam roller will come in handy. A stiletto or something similar will come in handy. You may also need the seam ripper end, but hopefully just this end. And you will also need an iron, which I don't have here in front of me, but you will see me use that shortly. So let's get ready to go. The blanket topper that I'm working with today is this gorgeous Dragon from Geek Garden. It's a very large topper. It's a full 2-yard size topper. So it's 2 yards long and it's 60 inches wide. So it's kind of tricky for me to put it all on camera at once. It does still have some of the selvage on the side. Sometimes when you get these blankets, they'll already be trimmed down and you won't have to do anything. But if it does have this white edge on it, you're going to want to go ahead and just cut that off. You can use your rotary cutter, you can use your scissors. It has a nice line to follow there, so that's pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. That will be our first step. And there's not a lot of other prep that we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now we're going to get our blanket binding ready. If you're doing the big blanket, as I said, you will need 2. If you're doing a small blanket, 1 will be enough. I like to join my blanket binding together before I start sewing my blanket so that it's already joined and I'm not trying to join it partway through. I just think it gives a cleaner look when it's on the edge of the blanket. To do that, I open one of these right up and I unwind it all the way to the end. When you're putting your blanket binding on, you can see this particular brand, the Wrights brand, I imagine that most are similar. One side is slightly wider than the other. I like to work with the wider side down so that when I am doing my stitches, I can see where it is on the more narrow side, and I know it's going to catch at the back. That little bit of extra width allows for the thickness of whatever you're putting between. These blankets are quite thin, they're just single layer, but if you were doing a thick quilt or a thicker blanket, then that would be more important because if you tuck in your layers there, then that's, you know, gonna curve around it, and then it might be less likely to meet up. So I work with the narrow side up. That means that when I join it, I have to make sure that I'm joining it the right way in here. I have the two ends of my first packet here. This is the end that I'm going to be starting on. Because of the way that I prefer to keep the blanket under my machine, I don't want to have the bulk of the entire blanket inside of the throat of the machine. So I want to be sewing with the edge going under my presser foot that way, rather than the other way here that would put the bulk of the blanket on this side. So I'm going to be starting from this end, which means that it's the far end of the first packet that I need to join to the top end of this packet. You do not need to unravel this one the entire way. You won't need that whole packet. I like to keep this bag too. I'll show you why. So unravel this just part of the way, and then looking at the two sides, you can see this is the narrow side and this is the narrow side. So you want to join them narrow sides together and the shiny side together. So we're going to line that up. It's not going to be perfect because the edges here have been heat sealed, so they're not perfectly even. That won't matter. Just line it up. If you concentrate on lining up the edge here rather than the edge here, you'll get the end result that you want. So I'm going to grab a couple of clips, and I clip there, and I clip here. Then what I'm going to do is head over to my sewing machine. I'll pop another one there in the middle there. Even though it's not lined up, it still keeps it in place. I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew down here about 1/2 inch. What I'm then going to do is clip the corners here, and then I'm going to seal them using my lighter, and then we're going to press that seam open, and that will mean that the edges will be better hidden when we get to that point in the blanket when we're sewing the trim on. So what we're doing right now is just preparing the binding so that we can go around the whole blanket in one go. This part I'm just doing with straight stitch. I've already got my walking foot on the machine, as that's what I'll be using when I'm putting the binding on. It's especially good for the slippery type material, as it will want to slide around, and the walking foot will just help it to stay together. Now what I like to do is finish off the ends of these threads here. Just melt those a little. Then I'm going to grab my scissors while my iron is heating up, and I'm going to snip the corner here and snip the corner here, and then I'm going to melt them. It's important when you melt those corners that you don't melt them together like this, because that's going to seal those two layers together. So you're going to want to open it out, and you just want to very carefully melt the ends there, melt the side of the cut there, so that it doesn't fray on you. Then the last thing that we need to do to get this ready to actually start the sewing part is to press this join open. I like to use a Teflon sheet to protect the binding. And just finger press that open. Put the Teflon sheet over the top. And then I'm just going to press here. I just press that seam open. And then I'm going to fold it in half. And then I'm going to press it again, lining up the crease from before as close as possible so that it stays nice and uniform with where the rest of the overlap is. Teflon sheet again to protect the material. Just a little bit of heat. And now that is joined, and we will have enough binding to go around our entire blanket. What we have now is our 2 pieces of blanket binding that are joined together, one that is completely unraveled and one that is folded up. What I like to do with the piece that is still folded up so it doesn't end up all over the floor of my sewing room is pop it back inside the bag that we saved from earlier. And that just keeps that nice and neat. You can also pop an elastic band around that just to keep it inside. And then that keeps that nice and neat until we get to it. What we will do now is get started on our binding. Let me put that out of the way. I like to start my binding in the center of the bottom side of the blanket, which is down here. It doesn't have to be exact. That's just where I like to do it. So we keep it with this side up, the slightly narrower side up. Open up your binding, and then you want to put the edge of your blanket right up to the crease in your trim. And then I fold it over, and then I like to put my clip on all the way. I do not clip all the way around yet. I clip as I go, but I do use about 3 clips or so and a couple of pins to keep everything in place as I'm going. And that way, if it gets crumpled up, I'm not clipping, unclipping, clipping, unclipping constantly. So I keep just a few pins next to the machine as I'm working. So I'm going to clip a few of those in. And then we are going to head over to the sewing machine and get started on our sewing. Before you start, make sure that you have enough thread in your bobbin, and preferably you have a walking foot on your sewing machine. The first part I'm going to be sewing with a straight stitch, and then we will be using a zigzag stitch. You can do the entirety with a straight stitch if you only have a straight stitch machine. The reason I like the zigzag is because sometimes with the straight stitch, especially when you get to the corners, you may miss the back fabric. You're more likely to catch it if you use a zigzag and have less corrections to go back and do later. So let's start off with the straight stitch. I try to butt the edge of the blanket up as close to the trim as I can, and then just hold that in place. And then about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the binding here, I'm just going to sew a row of straight stitches that goes almost to the end of the binding there. Then I'm going to turn 90 degrees. What I'm now going to do is change my machine to a zigzag setting. The zigzag I want to start on the left-hand side as close to the edge of the binding as I can, and then come in onto the binding itself. On the back, it won't be off. It will be on the entirety of the back because that piece is a little bit wider. I like to use a stitch length of 2 and a stitch width of 4. You can choose your settings based on what your machine stitches look like and what your personal preference is. So I'm going to get started with the zigzag, and this is being held in place by the clips, and we're just going to go a couple of inches down and then see how it looks. Okay, so this is staying tucked inside here because of your clips. You can now take this top clip off, and then I move down to the next piece. I pull my binding open, tuck the edge of the blanket in, feeling it with my hands, making sure that it's tucked in nice and snug, and pop another clip on. Then you can hold it back here for a little bit of support, making sure that you're not stretching anything as you go. The blanket, if you're using the double-sided fleece, the stretch minky, may stretch, so you want to be very careful that you're not pulling on it. If you're using a regular minky, then it doesn't have that stretch to it. If you're using 2 layers, you don't want to move it too much because then your layers may slide. So just making sure, I like to run my finger here to make sure that the blanket is up nice and close to the edge. It may not get all the way up there, but just nice and close there, and that it hasn't rolled. Supporting both the blanket and the binding from the front and the back, and then we'll just keep going through. And once you get into a good rhythm, you'll be able to do more than a couple of inches at a time. And if you get really good, you can keep going without the clips, but just be very careful if you're doing that your blanket is not rolling in underneath the blanket binding. It's a good idea to check your stitches from the back too, to make sure that you're happy with how your tension looks. Oftentimes a zigzag looks really good from the front, but on the back the tension is off, so you can adjust your settings if you need to. I'm just going to keep going until we get to the first corner, and then I'm going to show you how I do that. Coming up to the first corner here, I want to make sure that the corner of the blanket is tucked up as close to the fold in the binding as it can be, and we're going to sew a zigzag all the way to the edge of the blanket. Okay, what I then like to do is turn the blanket 90 degrees with the binding tape pointing towards me. I'm going to switch it to a straight stitch, and then I'm going to sew along the very edge of the blanket, or as close as I can, almost all the way to the edge of the trim. Turn it back, and now we are going to make the corners. Take your tape, move your clip out of the way, and you're going to open it up, and then you're going to pull the tape towards you with the needle down. You're going to tuck that corner there just underneath your presser foot, lining the crease of the binding up with the edge of your blanket. Going to work your way down a little, find a good spot, and then you're going to fold it and then clip it. That's just to hold it in place for now. Then you're going to take the tape on the back and then tuck that under. We're going to work on one corner at a time. I like to then take my thumb underneath the fold there, and then open it up again. You can pull it from underneath a bit. You want to try to get this edge of your blanket, if you can see that there, up as close to the crease as you can, and then fold it around. Pull it nice and snug, and then clip that there. You can move this whole placeholder clip down a bit. Then you want to crease that seam there at the front so that it meets up right here at the corner. And then I'm going to pop a very rarely used needle, sorry, pin, not needle, in here. I don't want to do it that way because then the head of the pin is going to be in the way. I'm just going to tuck it in there just for now. Just going through the front fold and the binding there. Then keeping the needle down, I'm looking on the back side, and I'm going to repeat on the back side, which is where it gets a little trickier. And I'm just lining up the fold here with the edge of my binding there. You can pop another pin in. I like to just hold it in place. Then I'm going to drop my presser foot again. It's currently on a straight stitch, so I'm going to lift the needle, put it back to my zigzag stitch, set it back to my chosen width and length. I'm going to just move it over slightly. And then I want, when my zigzag to come down, it to just catch that edge there. And that should catch most of the fold on the back too. I'll just hand crank it. And then we will get going again. And take it nice and slowly, holding it in place. Just check your corner there too, your edge there. Pull your pin out of the way, holding that in place. Sewing over that fold to get the nice neat corner. Then we're going to pivot it back. We're going to continue down this side. And once we get a little further up, we can have a look and see how that corner is. The zigzag is in the far right position at the moment, but we are going to have to move it because of where the edge of the trim is. So lift it up if you need to reposition your presser foot to get that back in the right spot so that the left side of the stitch is sitting at the edge of the blanket binding. You can go ahead and do that. And then we continue down this edge of the blanket. So let me just pivot that and let's check and see how our corner looks. So if you can see here, it's caught that edge there pretty well there. So I'm happy with that. And I'm going to continue back down this side until we get to the next corner. So once again, sewing all the way to the end, lift the presser foot, but leave the needle down, pivot 90 degrees, presser foot down again, raise the needle, switch to a straight stitch, and then sewing at the very edge of the blanket towards to the edge of the blanket binding. And we'll do this the same way as we did the last corner. Turn it back to face you. Open up the blanket binding. Take that crease and pull it towards you to line up with the edge of the blanket. Not worrying right away about this corner. We're just getting that the right angle there. Feeling for the edge of the blanket in that crease. Pop a clip on. And just loosely tuck that under for now. And pull it through a little bit to keep that corner nice and snug though. Now, using your finger in here, you want to get that crease out to the line, and then this edge of the blanket, you want this edge there to line up with this edge here. So we just want to fold that down there and keeping it snug at the edge of the blanket. Put that there. I'm going to grab another clip. Fold that around the edge, using the crease and the edge to check it's in the right spot. Turn it towards you, using your finger or your stiletto to get it lined up. Then grab that pin, and then we're just going to pop it in to keep that in place for now. Then we're going to look underneath at this corner here. Pull this edge of the binding up to line up with the edge of the blanket on the back. Hold that in place. Tuck it back under the presser foot if it popped up like mine did. And then we're turning it. Drop the presser foot back down. Lift the needle. Switch back to the zigzag setting. Set your stitch length and width. And move it over ever so slightly so that when the needle comes down on the left side, it's right around where the fold of your corner is. Hand crank a couple of stitches. And then continue on. Pull out your pin when you get close to it. If you need to do any more little adjustments, you can do that. Your goal being to keep this corner lined up here. Just check my blanket edge inside here isn't rolling. It feels nice there. Continue on, get to the corner. You can use your stiletto if you feel like it's not going to line up quite where you want it to. Okay. And then turn it back this way. Before we keep going, we will get our blanket tucked into the crease of the binding again. We will continue down a couple of inches and then we can check the back there. You can feel it even though you can't really see it yet. And then we get that tucked back in. Then continue along this side. Do a couple of inches and then I will flip that over to see how our second corner looks. Okay. And that one seems to have caught that pretty well too. So I'm happy with that. And we will keep going. I will show you on the next corner a slightly different way to do the mitered corner. I don't know the official way that you're supposed to do it. This is just a way that I have found works reasonably well for these slippery materials. So let's go down this side, and then I will show you another way that you can do it to try to get it a little more lined up if that's something that is important to you. We're coming up to the corner again. You can see I'm at the point where I joined the two packets of blanket binding together. I'm just going to sew over that as normal, and I am going to show you a slightly different way to do the corner. So continuing straight along, right to the edge again. Okay, and then the same as we did, I'm going to turn it and then switch to a straight stitch and sew towards me. What I'm then going to do is go back to the middle here, and then I'm going to finish my stitching there. I'm going to take it off the machine in the middle so that the threads are going to be hidden. So I'm going to pull that out and tie that. That's going to be hidden inside the corner, so we can just snip that. Now, the other way that you can do the corner, if you're having trouble with tucking it under when it's still on the machine, is take it off and do it off the machine. So you can finish your stitching in the middle here, knot your threads, and then pull it right off. Then the same way as we have been doing, open up your bias tape, and you're just going to fold it the same way, lining up this crease here with the edge of the blanket. But because it's off the machine, you are able to manipulate it a little bit more to get it to be more exact. So, folding that over, curving it around. I'm going to pop a clip on so that I can get my corners lined up. So this is a little trickier to show sitting here at the machine. I'm going to tuck this edge of the blanket up again, the same as we were doing it, under the presser foot. Tuck that under. Grab another clip from back here. Make sure that's tucked up there. And now we can do whatever we need to do to get our corners the way that we like them. So, folding that there, I'm going to grab my pin. And I'm going to pin that here temporarily. And then turn it over. And then using my fingers or my stiletto, lining this corner up on the back so that I can turn it over and I can really see where the edges of the bias tape are lining up so that I can pin it and make sure that I'm happy with that placement there. And a second pin, slide it through. You can put as many pins in as you want to try to keep it where you want it to be. Flip it back over. And then we are going to sew that seam there. You can start at this corner and go up and back if you want. I don't love the look of 2 zigzags, so I am not going to do it like that, but you certainly can if you want to start it at that corner. I'm going to start it up here again. I'm going to do a straight stitch on the fold for just a couple of stitches just to secure the end. And then I'm going to switch it back to the zigzag like we did with the previous corners. Now this pin is going to be in the way here, so let me just slide that out. Drop that presser foot again. And then when we're done, we will have to finish off the threads where we just started sewing again. Knot them and tuck those in. Grab this pin from the back. Holding that in place. Smoothing the blanket down there into the corner. And go all the way up. Then turn. If you finish with the needle on the left side of this corner zigzag, then you don't have to reposition your foot after you turn. It just makes it a little bit easier. Then drop that presser foot again. Keep going down this side. Go a few more inches. And then we can turn it and have a look. So, well, this is not even, the other ways were a little neater, but you can see that it's caught the stitches here. That's because I pulled the pin out. But just gives you another way to do it if you're having trouble tucking your corners under. I think I'll stick with the other way. I don't like having all the threads there, and it's working out just fine. But that's just another option if you're having trouble maneuvering it underneath your presser foot. This also has come to the point where I'm going to open this up and pull that out. And then you can unravel some more and put it back into the bag, or you can just drop it down next to you. I'm going to continue the rest of the way around the blanket. We have one corner to go, and then we will be just about done. So let us continue on. I thought I'd try it this way one more time, see if we can get it just a little bit neater. So I'm just going to fold that at the corner there. Tuck that around. Catch my binding here. There's so much blanket here. Okay, fold that around the corner there. Pop a clip on. Okay, now lining up. I want to get this edge to line up to this edge. So this corner is too tucked in. So I need to untuck it a little. Just roll it out. And then I can grab a pin. And that's what's happening when you're sewing it blind. It's just tucking back under. So Maybe I need to leave the pin in a bit longer. So we'll tuck that in there. Turn it back this way. And then I'm going to pop another pin in the front. Okay. And then just try to neaten that corner up a little. Then we will sew this again this way. A couple straight stitches to start. Back to the zigzag. And cranking. Watch out for the pins underneath. And then I'm going to sneak my hand in here, pull that pin out. Okay, then we turn. And we are on the final stretch here. Let me get that blanket tucked up in the corner again, in the crease again. Roll it in. And as you can see, we're nearly back to where we started. Grab a couple of pins, sorry, clips, and get that tucked in. Do not guess how much more of your binding that you're going to need. I recommend waiting until you get there. I guessed short on one of these that I did the other day, and I ended up having to make a small patch with a little piece of the binding to cover up just like a little ½ inch gap that I had. So I recommend not trying to guess how much more of the tape you're going to need. We will tuck that in there. Oh, I guess we should check that corner. Okay, and that did catch it a lot better that time, so we'll have to go back and finish off those threads there. But if you have your pins in there, maybe just keep them in a little bit longer so that it doesn't try to roll back under like it did on that first one that we did that way. So you can see here, we're getting close to where the end is here. So we're going to go down to around here, and then we will cut it, and then we will finish it off just with the short overlap. You can see here where it's going to overlap. So now I feel confident in putting my scissors to the fabric. So I'm just going to pull that blanket out of the way. I'm still going to have like a good 2 inches. I'm going to snip it here. Then I can get the rest of that tape out of the way. Before I sew any further, what I want to do is melt the edge of the binding here so that it doesn't fray. What I then like to do is fold it under about 1/2 inch. You can finger press it, you can get your seam roller, however you like to do it. Just fold that under there just to get an idea. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip this corner inside of where I've creased it. And I'm going to just, I'm sorry, that was loud. I'm just going to melt that too. Just a little. Just a little. And then tuck it back under and then fold it back over so that you can see that you'll have a nice folded over edge where the bit starts to get at the bottom. So pull your blanket down. Got these threads from where we started out. I'm going to snip since they will be caught inside. Then pulling the last little bit nice and straight. I'm going to clip that. I'm going to fold that under. So just, if I had pressed it with my iron, it would stay, but I don't have my iron this close to my sewing machine. And then I'm going to fold that over. You could grab your pin. Actually, maybe I will grab my pin. And just pin that there. And that keeps that edge lined up nicely. And then fold the back under as well. Pin that too if you want. I'm just going to pop a clip here. And then keep going. Now, here you can see a little bit of where we started. It's just poking out a bit. So if you are able to kind of tuck that under, you can hide that a little. Keep going. I'm going to get all the way to this edge here. I'm going to pop that pin out. I'm going to keep going all the way up. Then I'm going to turn. And then you could do a straight stitch down here. I'm going to do a zigzag just to make sure that I'm catching the back as well. I caught that corner, just lift that up. All the way to the edge. Then I'm going to switch back to a straight stitch. Just a couple of stitches just to finish it off. Pull that through. And I will tuck the couple of loose threads that we have in, but there you go. You can see we've got our zigzag binding. Save a couple of threads that I still need to finish off from where we stopped and started. It goes all the way around, finishing off this double-sided fleece blanket. And there we are. Thanks, everybody.